The great hall of the Valkyrie throne world stretched for nearly a mile, and every inch of it was filled with the most powerful beings in 12 star systems. Queen Sithara sat upon her throne of black crystal, watching the ceremony unfold with cold yellow eyes that revealed nothing of the worry eating at her heart. Today was the bonding conclave, an ancient ritual that would decide the future of her empire. And everything depended on one simple thing. Someone had to want her daughter. The Valkyrie were a proud species, tall and elegant with scales that shimmered like liquid metal in the light of their twin suns. They had ruled this corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years through cunning, discipline, and an absolute devotion to order. Their minds were linked through psychic bonds that allowed them to sense each other's thoughts and emotions, and they valued nothing more than control over their empires. Their enemies, and most importantly, themselves, emotions were weakness to them, something to be suppressed and hidden away like a shameful disease. This was the world that Princess Kiraveth had been born into, and from her very first breath, everyone knew something was wrong with her. She stood now at the center of the great hall, dressed in ceremonial robes of silver and blue, trying desperately not to let her fear show on her face, but she could feel the disapproval radiating from every corner of the room, could sense the whispers that followed her wherever she went. The princess was broken, they said, defective in ways that could not be fixed, and like every other Valkyrie in existence, Kiraveth felt things, truly felt them, with an intensity that terrified her own people. When she was happy, she laughed out loud, a sound that made others flinch, as if she had screamed. When she was sad, tears fell from her eyes, something no proper Valkyrie had done in thousands of years. Her body ran hot, warm to the touch in a way that made her own mother uncomfortable holding her as a child. And worst of all, she had no psychic abilities whatsoever. Her mind a strange blank void that no one could read or connect with to the Valkyrie. She was not just different, she was an aberration, a mistake that should never have been born. The first suitor approached the platform where Kiraveth stood, and she forced herself to keep her head high, even though her hearts were pounding so hard she thought they might burst. Lord Vexton of House Eternal was tall and handsome by Valkyrie standards, his scales a deep emerald green that spoke of ancient noble bloodlines. He circled her slowly, his psychic senses reaching out to touch her mind, and she saw the exact moment when his expression changed from careful interest to barely hidden disgust. "I sense nothing," he announced to the court, his voice dripping with contempt. "Her mind is empty, chaotic, like staring into a void of madness." He turned to face the queen and bowed with exaggerated formality. "House Eternal respectfully declines this match. Your Majesty, we cannot risk such corruption entering our genetic line." Kiraveth felt the words like physical blows, but she did not cry, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The second suitor came forward, and then the third, and then a fourth. Each one performed the same ritual examination. Each one recoiled from what they found, and each one delivered their rejection with varying degrees of cruelty by the seventh suitor. Kiraveth had stopped counting the insults by the 10th. She had stopped hoping. The final suitor was young, barely older than herself, and for one brief moment saw something that might have been sympathy in his eyes. But then his father stepped forward and whispered something in his ear, and whatever kindness had been there vanished like smoke. "House Ascendant declines," the young lord said, not meeting her eyes. "The princess is unsuitable for bonding." And then it was over. The great hall fell silent as the last of the suitors departed, their rejection complete and absolute. 12 noble houses from across the empire had examined Princess Kiraveth and found her wanting, had looked at everything she was and decided that she was worth nothing. Queen Sithara dismissed the court with a wave of her hand, and the thousands of witnesses filed out in orderly silence, leaving only the queen, her closest advisors, And her unwanted daughter, leave us, the queen commanded, and Kiraveth fled without a word. Desperate to escape, before the tears she had been holding back could shame her further, she ran through the palace corridors, past guards who pretended not to see her distress, until she reached the one place in the entire world where she felt safe. The Forbidden Garden was a disgrace by Velkhari standards. A chaotic tangle of plants and flowers that grew wild and untamed behind the palace walls. Her people hated disorder, despised anything that could not be controlled and categorized. So they had long ago abandoned this place to nature's chaos. But Kiraveth loved it here, had spent countless hours cultivating the wild beauty. Talking to the flowers as if they could hear her, she collapsed beside a pool of dark water and finally let herself cry. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. All her life she had tried so hard to be what her people wanted, had struggled to suppress her emotions, to be cold and controlled and proper, but it was never enough, would never be enough, because she could not change what she was. Back in the throne room, Queen Sithara sat alone with her most trusted advisor, staring at the empty platform where her daughter had stood. "No one wants her," the queen said, a voice flat and hollow. 23 suitors over the past 5 years, and not a single one would have her. "Perhaps, your majesty, we could..." "Could what?" the queen interrupted. "Force someone to take her, knowing they would resent the match and plot against us for generations to come?" She rose from her throne and walked to the great window that overlooked her empire. Countless ships moving through the darkness between stars. "My daughter will never secure an alliance, will never produce heirs that the noble houses will accept. The Dominion's future dies with my bloodline." In the shadows at the far end of the hall, someone had witnessed the entire ceremony, had watched every rejection, and heard every cruel word. Commander Marcus Cole was a human, one of only a dozen currently serving in the first diplomatic mission to the Velkhari Empire. He was short by Velkhari standards, soft and fragile-looking, with brown skin and dark eyes that revealed every emotion. He felt his species was young and weak compared to the great powers of the galaxy. Newcomers to the interstellar stage who had only discovered faster than light travel a mere century ago, the Velkhari considered humans barely worth noticing. Useful perhaps as trading partners, but certainly not as equals. Marcus had stood in his assigned corner throughout the bonding conclave, officially there to observe and report back to Earth's government, unofficially wondering why anyone would want to marry into such a cold and cruel society. But then he had watched the princess, had seen the way she fought to maintain her dignity, even as they tore her apart piece by piece. He had seen her hands trembling, had noticed the tears she refused to let fall, and something in his chest had started to burn with an emotion the Velkhari would never understand. It was not pity, it was recognition, because Marcus knew what it felt like to be different, to be judged for things you could not control, to be told again and again that you were not good enough. And as he watched the queen pronounce her daughter's fate with cold finality, a thought began to form in his minda, thought that was either the bravest or the stupidest thing he had ever considered. But then again, humans had never been very good at knowing the difference. The Forbidden Garden was dark when Marcus found her, lit only by the pale glow of 3 moons hanging low in the alien sky. He had followed the sound of crying through the palace corridors, past guards who paid no attention to the insignificant human wandering where he probably should not go. Now he stood at the edge of the tangled wilderness, watching the princess sob beside a pool of still water, and he wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. Probably yes, he thought to himself, but he had never been very good at walking away from someone in pain. "Excuse me," he said softly, and the princess spun around so fast that she nearly fell into the pool. Her eyes were red from crying, and her face was wet with tears. And for a moment, she simply stared at him as if he were some strange creature that had wandered in from another world. "Which He supposed you should not be here, Kiraveth said, her voice rough and broken. This place is forbidden. I know, Marcus replied, taking a careful step closer. But I heard you crying, and I wanted to make sure you were okay. The princess laughed, a bitter sound that held no real humor in it. Okay, does that word mean the same thing to humans as it does to us? Because if so, the answer is no. I am very far from okay. She turned away from him, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were cold. Did you come here to stare at the broken princess? To see the monster that even her own people cannot love? I came here because what happened in that hall was wrong, Marcus said simply. And because no one should have to cry alone. Kiraveth went very still, and when she turned back to face him, there was something new in her expression, confusion mixed with a fragile hint of hope. You are the human, she said slowly. From the diplomatic mission, Commander Marcus Cole, at your service. He gave a small bow, the human gesture of respect, looking strange and awkward in this alien garden. I do not understand you, the princess said, taking a step toward him. You are not repulsed by my tears. You do not flinch from my warmth or look at me like I am diseased. Why would I be repulsed by tears? Marcus asked, genuinely confused. On my world, crying is normal. Everyone does it when they are sad or hurt, or sometimes even when they are happy. Happy. Kiraveth repeated the word as if it were spoken in a foreign language. Your people cry when they are happy. All the time, at weddings, at births, when someone we love achieves something wonderful. He smiled at her. A warm human smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Emotions are not weakness where I come from. Princess, they are what make us who we are. Kiraveth sat down heavily on a stone bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. All my life I have been told that there is something wrong with me, that my feelings are a sickness that brings shame to my family. And now you stand here telling me that your entire species is like me? More or less, Marcus said, sitting down beside her without asking permission. Humans feel things very deeply. We love, we hate, we fear, we hope, and we do not believe that hiding those feelings makes us stronger. They talked for hours that night, sitting side by side in the Forbidden Garden while the three moons traced their slow paths. Across the sky, Kiraveth asked him about Earth, about human families and human love and human art. Marcus told her about music that could make you weep with its beauty, about poetry that captured emotions too big for ordinary words, about the way humans would sometimes die for the people they loved, and in turn. She told him about her lonely childhood, about the mother who could not bear to touch her, about the endless parade of tutors who tried and failed to fix what was not broken by the time the first sun began to rise. Something had changed between them. They were no longer strangers from different worlds. They were two souls who had found in each other something rare and precious. Marcus returned to the human embassy that morning, but he did not sleep instead. He sat at his desk and read through every document he could find about Valkyrie law, about marriage customs, about the ancient treaties that bound their two peoples together. And when he found what he was looking for, buried deep in the trade compact that had been signed just 6 months ago, he smiled a smile that would have worried anyone who knew him well. The next morning, Commander Marcus Cole requested a formal audience with Queen Cythera. The court gathered once again in the Great Hall. Curious about what this insignificant human could possibly want, Marcus walked to the center of the room and stood in the exact spot where the princess had stood during her humiliation. And he felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes watching his every move. Your Majesty, he said, his voice clear and strong, I invoke Article 17 of the Human Valkyrie Trade Compact, which states that any citizen of either nation may petition for marriage alliance with a member of the other. The hall went absolutely silent. I hereby formally offer myself as suitor to Princess Kiraveth. For a long moment, nothing happened, and then the court erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted in outrage. Advisors demanded that this insult be punished, and generals called for the human to be executed on the spot for his audacity. But Queen Sithara raised one hand and silence fell like a blade. "You dare," she said, her voice cold enough to freeze starlight. "You, a human, a creature from a species so young and weak that you have barely learned to walk among the stars. You dare to claim my daughter." "I do," Marcus replied, not backing down an inch. "The law is clear. Your Majesty, you cannot refuse a lawful petition." The Queen's eyes narrowed, and Marcus could feel her rage pressing against him like a physical force. But he also saw something else in her expression. Something that might have been respect mixed with calculation. "Very well. Human, the law is the law, even when it protects fools." She rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood directly in front of him, towering over his small human form. "You will face the trials of ascension, the same tests that every suitor must pass to prove their worthiness. Trials designed for Velkhari warriors with centuries of training." "I accept," Marcus said without hesitation. "You will almost certainly die." The Queen continued, "No human has ever faced these trials, and I do not expect you to survive even the first one. Then I will die trying, but I will not withdraw." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Searching his face for any sign of doubt or fear, she found neither. "You have 30 solar cycles to complete the trials. May your strange human gods have mercy on you, because my people will not in the crowd of watching nobles." Princess Kiraveth stood frozen in shock. This human, this strange warm-blooded creature she had met only hours ago, had just volunteered to face almost certain death. For her, she wanted to run to him, to tell him to stop this madness before it was too late. But another part of her, a part that had been silent for her entire life, was whispering something she had never allowed herself to believe. Maybe, just maybe, she was worth fighting for after all. The trial of mind began at dawn on the third day, in a chamber deep beneath the palace where no light had shone for 1,000 years. Marcus knelt in the center of a circle of ancient stones, surrounded by 12 Velkhari psychics who had spent their entire lives learning to break minds like his. "You cannot win this," the lead psychic told him, her voice echoing in the darkness. "Your species has no mental defenses, no psychic training, no way to protect yourself from what we are about to do. Then I guess we will find out what happens when an unstoppable force meets a very stubborn human." Marcus replied the attack came without warning. A wave of psychic energy that crashed against his mind like a tsunami. Marcus felt them tearing through his thoughts, ripping open his memories, searching for the fears and weaknesses that would destroy him from within. They found his childhood, the poverty and hunger, the father who left and never came back. They found his military service, the friends he had lost in battles on distant worlds, the faces of people he could not save. They found his loneliness, his doubt, his secret fear that he would never be good enough, and they used it all against him, twisting his memories into weapons, making him relive every painful moment of his life in excruciating detail. Any Velkhari would have shattered under such an assault, their ordered crystal minds cracking into a million pieces. But human minds were different, where Velkhari thoughts were structured and rigid. Human thoughts were wild and chaotic and impossibly resilient. Marcus did not try to fight the psychics. Instead, he let them in, let them see everything. And then he showed them something they had never encountered before. He showed them love, not the cold political alliances that passed for affection among the Velkhari, but real human love in all its messy, painful, beautiful glory. He showed them his mother singing him to sleep, his first kiss behind the school building, the way his heart had broken when his dog died, and the way it had healed again in time. He showed them the moment in the garden when he had looked at Kiraveth and known, with absolute certainty, that he would do anything to make her smile. The psychics recoiled as if they had been burned, pulling out of his mind so fast that several of them stumbled backward. "What was that?" one of them whispered, her voice shaking. "What did we just see?" "That was humanity," Marcus said, rising slowly to his feet. "We are chaos and contradiction, love and hate, hope and despair, and we do not break easily." The trial of mind was over, and against all odds, the human had passed. The trial of body came next, and it was designed to be even more brutal than the first. Marcus would have to cross the Vashar Mountains on foot, a journey of 200 miles through volcanic terrain that killed even trained Valkyrie warriors. He would face extreme heat, poisonous gases, predators that hunted in the lava flows, and he would have to do it faster than any of the other champions competing alongside him. "You cannot possibly survive this," Hiravith told him the night before the trial, standing with him on the palace balcony. "The Vashar has claimed hundreds of lives. Please, Marcus, withdraw while you still can." "I am not going to withdraw," he said, taking her hand in his, "and I am not going to die." "How can you be so certain?" Marcus smiled, that warm human smile that made her heart beat faster. "Because on my world, we have a saying: humans are not the fastest or the strongest or the most dangerous, but we are the best at one thing." "What thing?" "Not giving up." The trial began at sunrise, and the Valkyrie champions raced ahead with incredible speed, their cold-blooded bodies perfectly adapted to the volcanic heat. Marcus fell behind almost immediately, his soft human skin burning in the hot air, his lungs struggling with the thin atmosphere. But he did not stop. Hour after hour, he walked through the hellish landscape, putting one foot in front of the other while the suns beat down on him without mercy. The Valkyrie champions sprinted in bursts of incredible speed, then stopped to rest and recover their strength. Marcus just kept walking. By the end of the first day, 2 champions had collapsed from exhaustion, their bodies giving out from the constant sprinting. By the end of the second day, 3 more had fallen, unable to match the relentless pace of the strange human who never seemed to stop moving. On the third day, Marcus caught up to the remaining champions, passing them one by one as they lay gasping in the shade of volcanic rocks. "How?" one of them croaked as Marcus walked past. "How are you still moving?" "My ancestors used to chase animals across entire continents," Marcus said. Not slowing down, they would follow their prey for days, never letting it rest, until it collapsed from exhaustion. "We call it persistence hunting." He smiled grimly. "You are faster than me, stronger than me, better adapted to this environment, but I will never, ever stop." Marcus crossed the finish line on the 4th day, the last champion standing, and collapsed into unconsciousness with a smile on his face. The trial of blood was the final physical test, and in many ways it was the most dangerous. Marcus would have to hunt and kill a Tharkith beast, a massive predator that stood 12 feet tall and was covered in armor-like scales that could stop plasma fire. Even Valkyrie warriors with centuries of experience feared the Tharkith, and many suitors had died in this trial throughout history. But Marcus had something the Valkyrie did not: the human gift for thinking outside the box. He spent 3 days simply watching the beast, studying its patterns, learning its habits. He discovered that it was afraid of fire, that it always returned to the same watering hole at dusk, that its armored scales had gaps near the joints where the flesh was vulnerable. And then he laid his trap using techniques his ancestors had developed thousands of years ago. Marcus dug pits filled with sharpened stakes, rigged snares that would tangle the beast's legs, and prepared torches that would drive it exactly where he wanted it to go when the Tharkith came to drink that evening. Marcus was waiting. The battle was brutal and bloody, and Marcus took wounds that would have killed a lesser man. But when the dust settled, he stood over the fallen beast, his knife buried in the soft flesh beneath its jaw, and he let out a roar of triumph that echoed across the mountains. He dragged the Tharketh's horn back to the palace, and laid it at the queen's feet. His body broken, but his spirit undefeated. "The trial of blood is complete," he said. And then he collapsed in the watching crowd. Kiraveth wept openly, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face, and for the first time in her life, no one looked away in disgust because they were all too busy staring at the impossible human who refused to die. Marcus spent 2 weeks recovering from his wounds. And during that time, Kiraveth barely left his side. She brought him food from the palace kitchens. Strange Velkara dishes that she tried to make more suitable for human taste. She read to him from ancient books, translating the poetry of her people into words he could understand, and she talked to him for hours and hours, telling him things she had never told anyone before. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him one night, sitting beside his bed in the medical wing. "You have already proven yourself 10 times over. You could withdraw now with honor. Return to your own people as a hero. Is that what you want?" Marcus asked, his voice still weak from his injuries. "No," she admitted. "But I do not understand why you would risk so much for someone you barely know." Marcus reached out and took her hand, his warm human fingers intertwining with her scaled ones. "On my world, there is a saying home is not a place. It is a person, and from the moment I saw you in that garden, crying alone in the dark, I knew I had found my home." Kiraveth felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked away her entire life for the first time. She truly believed that someone could love her, not despite her differences, but because of them. The final trial was called the Trial of Spirit, and it was supposed to be the simplest of all. Marcus would enter the Temple of Eternity, stand before the ancient altar, and speak the words of binding, a sacred oath that would be judged by the ancestor mind. A psychic consciousness formed from the memories of 1,000,000 Valkyrie who had lived and died over 10,000 years. If the ancestor mind accepted the oath, the trial would be complete, and Marcus would have won the right to marry Princess Kiraveth. Not everyone wanted to see that happen. Lord Cathver was one of the most powerful nobles in the empire, and he had spent the past month watching in horror as this human outsider accomplished the impossible. The very idea of human blood mixing with the royal line filled him with disgust, and he had gathered a group of like-minded nobles who shared his outrage. The human must not complete the final trial, he told his co-conspirators in a secret meeting the night before the ceremony. If he speaks the words of binding and the ancestor mind accepts him, it will be too late. He will be beyond our reach, protected by laws even the queen cannot break. Then we must make sure he never reaches the altar. One of them replied their plan was simple and brutal. They bribed the temple guardians to look the other way while they flooded the sacred chamber with a neurotoxin that was harmless to Volcari, but deadly to humans, and just in case the poison was not enough, they hired 6 of the deadliest assassins in the empire to wait in the shadows. The human would die in the temple, and they would blame it on his weak alien physiology. No one would ever know the truth. Marcus entered the Temple of Eternity at dawn, wearing the ceremonial robes of a suitor and carrying no weapons. The temple was ancient beyond imagining, its walls covered with carvings that told the history of the Valkyrie people from their earliest days. He walked slowly through the outer chambers, following the path that countless suitors had walked before him, and he felt the weight of history pressing down on him from every side. But something was wrong. His vision began to blur, and his lungs started to burn with every breath. He stumbled, catching himself against a pillar, and realized with growing horror that the air itself was poisoned. "Clever," he whispered, forcing himself to keep moving. "Very clever." The assassins emerged from the shadows when he was halfway to the altar. 6 Valkyrie warriors armed with blades designed to cut through armor. They moved with inhuman speed, surrounding him before he could react. And the lead assassin smiled with cold satisfaction. "Nothing personal," Human, you fought well. But this is where your story ends. Marcus should have died in that moment. Weak and poisoned and unarmed against 6 trained killers, but the assassins had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that a weakened human would be easy prey. They did not understand that humans are never more dangerous than when they are cornered. Marcus exploded into motion, driven by adrenaline and desperation and a love so powerful it refused to let him fall. He caught the first assassin's blade with his bare hand, ignoring the pain as it cut through his flesh, and used the momentum to throw the warrior into his companions. The second assassin died with his own knife in his throat. Marcus, moving with a speed and ferocity that seemed impossible for his wounded body, he fought like a wild animal, all instinct and rage, breaking bones and tearing flesh with his bare hands. Blood poured from a dozen wounds. His vision narrowed to a tiny point of light. And still he fought on because he was not fighting for honor, or glory, or even survival. He was fighting for her. The last assassin fell, and Marcus stood alone in the blood-soaked chamber. Swaying on his feet but still alive, he turned toward the altar, barely 30 feet away, and began to walk. Each step was agony, each breath a battle, but he refused to stop. Behind him, he heard the sound of running footsteps and a voice crying out his name. Kiraveth burst into the temple. Having sensed that something was terribly wrong, she had defied her mother's guards, fought her way through the palace, and arrived just in time to see Marcus collapse at the foot of the altar. "No," she screamed, running to him, catching him before he hit the ground. No, you cannot die. Not now. Not when we are so close." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes barely focusing. And somehow he smiled. "I have to say the words," he whispered. "Help me stand." She lifted him, taking his weight on her shoulders. And together, they climbed the final steps to the altar. The ancestor mind stirred. A presence so vast and ancient that it seemed to fill the entire temple. It reached into Marcus's mind, searching for his intentions, his truth, the core of who he really was, and what it found there made it pause in wonder. Here was a creature from a young and fragile species, someone who had no business surviving the trials, who should have given up 100 times over, but he had not given up, had never even considered it, because he loved someone with a purity and intensity that the ancestor mind had not seen in millennia. "I offer myself," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, "not as a conqueror or a politician, but as a man who loves your daughter. I will stand beside her in joy and sorrow, in triumph and defeat, until the stars themselves grow cold. This I swear on my life, my honor, and my soul." The ancestor mind considered his words for a long moment, and then, for the first time in 10,000 years, it spoke aloud. "The oath is accepted." Marcus smiled one last time, and then the darkness claimed him. He collapsed in Kiraveth's arms, his body finally giving out after everything it had endured. And she held him close and wept. The temple doors burst open, and Queen Sithara swept in. Surrounded by guards and advisors, she took in the scene, the dead assassins, the poisoned air, the human lying motionless in her daughter's arms, and her face went cold with fury. "Find out who did this," she commanded, her voice like ice. "Find them and bring them to me." She looked down at Marcus, this strange, impossible creature who had turned her entire world upside down, and made a decision that would change everything. "Summon the healers," she said. "The best we have. This human will not die, not today. Not in my temple." Kiraveth looked up at her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you helping him?" The queen was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than her daughter had ever heard it. "Because he has shown me something I had forgotten existed. Because in all my years of rule, I have never seen anyone fight so hard for love." She knelt beside her daughter and placed a hand on Marcus's chest. Feeling the weak but steady beat of his human heart, And because, despite everything I believed, it seems that humans are not so different from us after all. Marcus drifted in darkness for 7 days, his body fighting to survive wounds that should have killed him 10 times over. The Valkyrie healers worked around the clock, using technologies and techniques that had never been tried on a human before. They pumped his blood full of nanomachines that repaired his damaged organs, bathed him in regeneration tanks that accelerated his healing, and monitored his strange alien brain for any sign of permanent damage. And through it all, Kiroveth never left his side. She held his hand during the long nights, talking to him even though he could not hear her, telling him about the future they would build together if only he would wake upon the 8th day. His eyes opened. "Hey," he said, his voice rough and weak. "Did I miss anything?" Kiroveth burst into tears and threw her arms around him, holding him so tight that the healers had to gently remind her that he was still fragile. "You impossible, stubborn, wonderful human," she said between sobs. "I thought I had lost you." "Not a chance," Marcus replied, reaching up to touch her face. "I made you a promise. Remember, I do not break my promises." The wedding took place 1 month later, in the great hall where Kiroveth had once stood alone and rejected by everyone who should have loved her. But this time, everything was different. The hall was filled with flowers from the Forbidden Garden. Wild and beautiful and utterly improper by Valkyrie standards, music played human music that Marcus had requested. Songs about love and hope and second chances, and standing at the altar was a man in ceremonial armor, human military medals gleaming beside Valkyrie decorations. Waiting for the woman who had changed his life, Kiroveth walked down the aisle in a gown of silver and white, her eyes wet with tears that she no longer tried to hide. And for the first time in history, the nobles of the Valkyrie court did not look away in disgust. They watched, and many of them felt something strange happening in their own hearts, something they had no name for, because they had spent so many generations trying to forget it existed. The ceremony blended human and Valkyrie traditions, creating something entirely new. Marcus and Kiroveth spoke vows that had never been heard before, promises of love and partnership and mutual respect. And when they kissed, a human gesture that the Valkyrie had always considered primitive and undignified. The crowd did not sneer or mock. They simply watched in wonder as two people from different worlds became one. Family Queen Sithara presided over the ceremony, and when it was complete, she did something unprecedented. She stepped forward and embraced her daughter, holding Kiroveth close for the first time since she was an infant. "I am sorry," the queen whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry for all the years I pushed you away. I thought I was protecting you by teaching you to be like us, but I was only hurting you. It does not matter anymore," Kiroveth replied. "All that matters is that we are here now." The wedding celebration lasted for 3 days, and during that time something remarkable began to happen. The Valkyrie, watching Marcus and Kiroveth together, started to question everything they had been taught about emotions. They saw the way the human looked at his wife, with such obvious love and adoration that it was impossible to miss. They saw the way he made her laugh, a sound that had once made them uncomfortable, but now seemed strangely beautiful. And slowly, one by one, they began to remember what it felt like to feel in the weeks and months that followed. The changes spread across the empire like ripples in a pond. The empire's greatest scientists studied Princess Kiroveth and discovered something extraordinary. Her condition was not a defect at all. Deep in the Valkyrie genetic code, buried beneath millennia of selective breeding, were the same emotional pathways that she possessed. The ancient Valkyrie had been just like her, capable of love and joy and sorrow. Before they had decided that these things made them weak, Kiroveth was not broken. She was a glimpse of who her people had once been, and who they could become again. The news spread like wildfire. And suddenly everything changed. Parents looked at their own defective children with new eyes. Young Valkyrie, who had spent their entire lives hiding their feelings, began to speak openly about their emotions, and, across the galaxy, other species with similar outcasts started to question their own definitions of normal human philosophy. Art and music became subjects of intense study, no longer dismissed as primitive, but celebrated as profound. Exchange programs were established, bringing humans to the Valkyrie homeworld and sending young Valkyrie to Earth. And with each exchange, the two species learned more from each other, becoming not just allies but true friends. Years passed, and Marcus and Kiraveth built a life together that neither had ever dared to dream of. They had children, 3 of them, with scales like their mother and hearts like their father. The children grew up in the Forbidden Garden, which was no longer forbidden at all but had become the most popular destination in the palace. They laughed and cried and felt everything with an intensity that made their grandmother's heart sink. Queen Sithara spent her final years watching those children play, listening to their laughter echo off ancient walls that had been silent for too long. She had ruled the empire for over 2 centuries, but she knew that her greatest legacy would not be the wars she had won or the treaties she had signed. It would be this family, this love, this proof that change was possible, even for a species as old and set in its ways as Herson the day she died, surrounded by her daughter and grandchildren and the human who had turned her world upside down. She smiled. "Thank you," she whispered to Marcus, her voice fading like starlight at dawn. "Thank you for stepping forward when no one else would." "I just did what any human would do," Marcus replied, holding her hand as she slipped away. "No," Kiraveth said, tears streaming down her face. "You did what no one had done in 10,000 years. You reminded us how to love." The funeral of Queen Sithara was the largest gathering in Valkyrie history, and for the first time, the mourners did not stand in silent stoic rows. They wept openly, unashamed, honoring their queen with the tears she had finally learned to shed herself, and standing at the front of the crowd, watching the ceremony with pride and sorrow, were Marcus and Kiraveth, hand in hand, living proof that the galaxy could change. They, historians, would later mark that long ago moment as single human, stepping forward in a silent hall, as the day everything shifted, not through war or conquest, not through technology or political maneuvering, but through the simplest and most powerful force in the universe: love, stubborn and true. Refusing to give up even when the odds were impossible, Kiraveth became queen after her mother's death. And under her rule, the empire flourished as never before. Her children grew up to be leaders and artists and scientists, carrying the best of both species in their blood. And Marcus, the human who had walked through fire for a woman he barely knew, spent his remaining years exactly where he wanted to be, by his wife's side, in the garden that was no longer forbidden, watching their grandchildren play among the flowers. One evening, as they sat together watching the 3 moons rise, Kiraveth asked him the question that had haunted her since the very beginning. "Why?" she said. "Why did you step forward that night when everyone else walked away?" Marcus looked at her, his hair gray now but his eyes still full of the warmth that had captivated her all those years ago. "Because someone had to," he said simply. "And because you deserve to know that you were worth fighting for." Kiraveth leaned against him, feeling his human warmth, listening to the steady beat of his fragile, stubborn, beautiful heart. "I love you," she said. "I know," he replied. "I love you too, and somewhere among the stars." The ancestor mind smiled, because it had seen the future, and it was brighter than anything the Valkyrie had dared to imagine, all because one small human, from a young and fragile species, had refused to stand by while someone cried alone in the dark. That was what it meant to be human. The galaxy learned not the technology, not the ambition, not even the famous stubbornness. It was the love, infinite and unreasonable and absolutely unstoppable. And once the universe understood that, nothing would ever be the same again.